Ladies and gentlemen, members of the international media, this is Luis Cruz. We are honored that you're willing to hear about the grave situation faced by the Brazilian people and its serious consequences to Latin America, the United States, and the rest of the free world. This has become so critical that the Brazilian people will gather on a peaceful manifestation on March 2015 and others soon after, like the nationwide truckers' strike, which is paralyzing Brazil transport right now. We ask you to be there to witness and support our cause. Why this would be important for you? Well, first, because a truly peaceful Christian people, known worldwide for its welcoming nature, is being abused, deceived, and blatantly robbed. Our poor have been so manipulated and indoctrinated in the last decade by the Workers' Party, or PT, that many have become radical socialists, ready to jump the gun after being systematically exposed to a Machiavellic technique of progressive domination conceived by Gramsci. Well, this means that there is a good chance that Russia and Cuba really build military bases in Brazil in the very near future, altering the regional balance of power. Second, as most people know, Brazil is the fourth largest country in the world, the largest Catholic country, and we speak Portuguese. Its vast territory encompasses most of the Amazon and Pantanal basins and borders all South American countries with the exception of Chile and Ecuador. It contains not only the Amazon and the world's largest tropical forest harboring the greatest biological diversity, but also huge rivers like the Amazon, Negro, Madeira, and the Paraná, world's largest sources of potable sweet water. It also has very large reserves of the strategic niobium, plutonium, platinum, iron, titanium, manganese, and other minerals. Well, given the strategic alliances that the President Dilma and its corrupt Workers' Party have done with Cuba, Venezuela, Pakistan, Iran, and others, do you really want the most crazy dictators and radical socialist countries in the world to tell us how all of this is going to be used and by whom? I don't think so. Third, the current Brazilian radical socialist government has opened its border to many extremist countries harboring terrorists. Citizens from Iran, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Indonesia, and many others are now entering Brazil without any visa whatsoever. They arrive and soon receive free government assistance to settle down, study, travel, build mosques to fight Christianism, and work, enjoy free health care, and many soon will even vote. That means that there is a large potential for a terrorist hotspot covering Latin America and the Caribbean, relatively close to the US. Do you want that? Well, let us get you quickly acquainted with some basic Brazilian political facts. The early republic. Since 1930, the communists were trying to take the power in Brazil to transform it into a Soviet satellite. At the end of 1950, the comrades agreed to radicalize the revolutionary fight by creating guerrilla cells in all South America, all of them with the single objective of fostering communist dictatorships, following the principles of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. In 1954, the dictator Getúlio Vargas committed suicide after fierce opposition. In 1955, Mr. Juscelino Kubitschek won the elections for the Social Democratic Party and led the civil government with a conciliatory posture towards the Brazilian Workers' Party and the right wing. This allowed him to grow the economy and the industrial sector remarkably without crisis. He also built Brasilia, our capital. His successor was Mr. Jânio Quadros, who resigned in 1961, soon after taking office, mentioning his famous occult forces. His vice president, Mr. João Goulart, assumed the presidency, but after making several reforms, he aroused strong political opposition from the right-wing parties since he displayed great sympathy towards communist ideals. 2 years later, by 1963, Brazil passed through an anarchic period when several leftist terrorist groups disrupted public peace and prosperity. The military response grew proportionally to the attacks of these subversive terrorist groups. These included public building explosions, fires, bank robberies, executive and diplomat kidnappings, execution trials, and similar actions. The communists were trying hard to steer a revolution to transform Brazil into a new Cuba, and people were desperate. After widespread public manifestations with many millions on the streets shouting for security and democracy, in April 1964, a military board finally deposed Goulart with an intervention and installed a regime where the president was elected indirectly by the Congress, whose members were elected directly. With the military action, a group of these communists ran away abroad, while others went to the Amazon to form a guerrilla. However, they were soon subjugated and their leaders jailed. Order could finally prevail. The military regime and the Brazilian miracle. This period was characterized by several reserve military presidents. Once the first government was formed, one of the first strategies implemented was to develop the national infrastructure all over the country, including remote areas of the Amazon. This was a very busy period when roads, railroads, tunnels, ports, airports, hydroelectrics like Itaipu and other major infrastructure projects were successfully completed and employed hundreds of thousands of workers for several years. By connecting all major production and consumption centers, these projects could now provide the means for the reliable transportation and commercialization of goods and services on a steady basis. Well, besides infrastructure, the military also built hundreds of public schools, state and federal universities, which formed the academic basis for a truly national research and development effort for decades. Dozens of state hospitals and hundreds of public clinics fully equipped and providing good and reliable healthcare services. A military police system and road patrols in all states and border patrols preventing drug smuggling. Large state corporations to provide basic services and explore our resources like Petrobras, Eletrobras, Vale do Rio Doce, and several others. During this golden period, the Brazilian economic growth was extremely strong, and GDP grew consistently at one of the highest rates in the world. Companies were being created at a steady pace, and foreign multinationals were being opened everywhere, with no corruption news. Our criminality rates were very low, literacy was average, but was growing to educational programs, and healthcare was good. Our governments praised and respected our Christian culture, morals, values, and tradition. Our nations were recognized for its achievement and cherished for its friendly posture. The civil regime. After this 25-year period, an amnesty law was signed in 1979 forgiving the exile and jail communists, like Ms. Dilma Rousseff. In 1985, a transition to a civil government was negotiated after a manifestation for direct elections. The last indirectly elected civil president was Congressman Tancredo Neves, who died in a hospital soon before taking power in 1985. The vice president, Mr. José Sarney, took over the government. He reestablished the direct presidential elections, proclaimed a new constitution in 1988, made an economic shock to try to curb inflation and end currency indexation, but failed, and hyperinflation took over the scenario. Mr. Fernando Collor de Mello was the next president, but was impeached by the National Congress in 1992 in a corruption scandal, proving that democracy was fully functional. Mello was succeeded by Vice President Itamar Franco, who appointed Mr. Fernando Henrique Cardoso as Minister of Finance. In 1994, Cardoso's team produced the highly successful Real Plan, which finally curbed hyperinflation and granted stability to the Brazilian economy after decades of failed economic plans. Thanks to this success, as minister, Mr. Cardoso could win the presidency that year and again in 1998. The mandates of Mr. Cardoso suffered several corruption scandals that were managed internally and quickly handled by a justice ready to hide uncomfortable cases. The most prominent personality in Cardoso's government was his wife, Mr. Ruth Cardoso, who conceived and implemented several social programs on a temporary and limited basis until economic progress reached underdeveloped areas. Unfortunately, they also serve as the basis for demagogical socialist claims by the Workers' Party, the Foro of São Paulo. In July 1990, the Workers' Party and Fidel Castro invited representatives from 48 communist parties and terrorist groups to create the São Paulo Forum, an organization that would coordinate all leftist movements under the direction of Mr. Lula da Silva with the following objectives: provide all help to Cuba, provide all help to elect Lula da Silva as Brazilian president, to allow a local operational base in an expressive government to facilitate the formation of the Union of the Latin American Socialist Republics, or URSAL, prevent the development of NAFTA, which would start in January 1994, focusing the fight against neoliberalism by all possible means. Ex-Brazilian President Lula da Silva sent the official invitation for the Foro of São Paulo meetings. The Foro of São Paulo has had more than 20 annual conferences where there are representatives for all Latin American radical socialist and pseudo-communist governments, associations, movements, groups, and even terrorist organizations like the FARC. This includes all Brazilian socialist and communist parties and groups like PT, PCdoB, PMDB, PSOL, PPS, and others. Foro São Paulo members use Antonio Gramsci's principles of progressive domination to take power by means of populist programs, education distortions, progressive destruction of our moral, religious, ethical, and family values, hate speech among social classes and races, disarmament of the military police, debilitation of the armed forces, electoral frauds and blatant electoral process manipulation, progressive distortion of the law, disobedience to the Constitution, direct interference with the judiciary power and the Supreme Court, exponential growth of the National Guard, and redirection of its actions to protect the government interest. What is most worrisome is that, if not fought, the Foro of São Paulo will gain control over a very significant mineral reserves of plutonium, niobium, oil, gas, and others, plus invaluable natural resources. This will give them the financial means to execute their radical socialist domination strategies towards the entire Latin America up to the borders of the US. By analyzing their foreign alliances, we can easily note that they prefer those who despise all moral, ethical, and religious values and are highly unpredictable. Among these are those like Cuba, North Korea, and terrorist-sponsoring countries like Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Palestine, Syria, etc. This means the possibility of international ballistic missile communist bases in Brazil and other Latin American countries, in a potential terrorist hotspot not far from the US border. Do you want that? The socialist regime. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Mr. Cardoso's successor in 2003 was Mr. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the main Foro São Paulo founder. The Brazilian economy started to deteriorate at that time. Lula arrived with aggressive demagogical politics with its false promises of benefits and social developments. His programs are purely populist. They do not try to eliminate the problems of the poor, but instead they keep them permanently. By doing so, they can blackmail the poor to do whatever they want, at the ultimate cost of harming economic growth and increasing inequality. He likes the poor so much that he wants to multiply them. Social programs like Bolsa Família, Family Allowance, Fome Zero, zero hunger, and Pronatec, access to technical education and jobs, are hallmarks of his time in office. However, the truth is that Lula did not conceive these programs. He simply bundled Ms. Ruth Cardoso's programs, made minor adjustments, and relaunched them under new names. Soon after, he made grandiose claims about them. As they really did not solve anything, it was no wonder to hear the announcement by PT that the Bolsa Familia is going to be canceled in 2015 as it had reached its objectives to gain votes. On the other hand, few citizens still believe the zero hunger benefit today with the blatant political manipulation of what is a low income by the federal EBGE Institute. The Pronatec program, on the other hand, has simply integrated the prior foundation courses used in the last 70 years without success. After transferring funds from these programs to other party purposes, the Workers' Party, or PT, will finish them in 2015. In order to support his candidacy and the Foro of São Paulo plans, Lula promoted not only populist programs but also hate speech among social classes. He used his influence and budgetary power to corrupt legislators and judges and distort our laws and our constitution, and also created educational programs that distorted Brazilian history and national values. His stated main accomplishment was to found the Foro of São Paulo, to implement socialism all over Latin America. What an accomplishment. Lula used his ambitious and deceiving rhetoric to play a prominent role in international relations, many of them going against the will, the traditions, and faith of our people, like establishing strong ties with brutal left-wing dictatorships and Cuban-style communist countries. The Workers' Party, or PT leadership, used the taxpayers' money to finance these countries without any valid collateral to benefit their governments in exchange of political and military promises to support PT and other major construction corporations in exchange of party donations. All of this done under a top-secret classification without Congress approval. Lula won a re-election by a very close count, by sheer electoral manipulation, demagogical benefits, empty promises, and lies. His administration is involved in 28 major corruption scandals, which he tried to manage internally by all possible means. Among them, we can cite the famous monthly stipends or mensalão, Anaconda operation, social services blow, brief dollars, they put dollars in the briefs, corporate cards, Satyagraha case, mail corruption, and many, many others. After leaving the government, Lula has been exhibiting a luxury lifestyle only compatible with large fortunes. His son, who was working as a zookeeper before, now owns several enormous tracts of land, is the major stockholder in 3 major food and telephony corporations whose capital is worth billions of dollars. Lula described him as a financial genius, but never explained where did he get those billions. Dilma Rousseff. Lula tried to prepare his succession carefully, but his potential successor, Mr. José Dirceu, was the mentor of the monthly stipends corruption scandal. Without a better replacement, Lula picked his Secretary of State and previous leftist terrorist colleague from 1964, Mrs. Dilma Rousseff, also from the PT. At that time, Dilma had no political expression, had never participated in any elections, and could only win the election due to Lula's support. She became Brazil's first female president with no business or political credentials. She gave continuation to all programs enacted by Lula without changes, and the new programs were those that had already been planned by the Workers' Party. Among those are the ones that constantly try to destroy our moral, religious, ethical, and family values. Dilma also gave great emphasis in promoting hate, not only among social classes like Lula did, but also among races, religions, and even demographic regions, north versus south, something previously unheard of in Brazil. PT's strategy is to divide the people to conquer it. PT leadership also makes a great effort to change any law and regulation that allow federal police investigations that can incriminate PT party members, that prevent establishment of easily defrauded electoral process, allowing them to remain in power, that prevent unrestricted utilization of the national treasury by the executive, that prevent the national budgetary directives law to allow her to disregard certain expenses to keep the balance positive through manipulation, and that give more power to the executive. The Brazilian healthcare system used to be good. Today, the PT has destroyed our public healthcare by criminal neglect and clear incompetence, without investing enough in doctors, medicine, beds, and equipment, with the appointment of a Minister of Healthcare that is not a doctor, with unapproved budget transfers to other ministries, with patients laying abandoned in the ground and even dying without assistance. The Brazilian public education also used to be good, but PT put our current education in the last but one rank among 40 countries. PT is trying to implement a new educational policy that entails removing important regular disciplines while adding very controversial ones. In 12 years, PT never produced any book against drug consumption, but removed disciplines like philosophy, English, moral and civics, and others to facilitate the subversion of Christian moral and ethics, decrease the influence of English culture, and fight the capitalist pedagogical process. PT is now facing great opposition in introducing obligatory classes and books of Islamic religion studies and sexual orientations, stimulating gay and lesbian behavior and sexual practice by 12-year-old kids, robbing their innocence and destroying their future happiness. Dilma government continued to follow Lula's direction to use the taxpayer money to finance these communist countries without the valid collateral, benefiting their governments and major construction corporations in exchange of military support and party donations as well. Among these are a $20 billion donation to Venezuela, a $1.7 billion loan to Argentina, a $1.5 billion loan to Nicaragua, a $1.3 billion loan to Venezuela, a $1.2 billion loan to Panama, a $0.8 billion donation to 12 African countries, a $0.3 billion loan to Peru, a $0.3 billion donation to Uruguay, and many more. Brazil has also spent $11 billion in the World Cup and is spending much more for the Olympics. It is no wonder that after all this, the Brazilian debt has skyrocketed to its highest level in history, to a staggering 2.1 trillion reais in June 2014. PT is breaking all his promises and pulling all aces from the sleeve to try to pay all this. Nevertheless, many consider that we will go bankrupt. Donating treasury funds while the country lacks so many public services is completely unacceptable and a true act of treason to the taxpayers. Brazilian public security was very good during the military regime. Today there's no security in Brazil, even in small country towns. The military police and the armed forces have been denigrated in high school classes, in official documents, and even accused by the ex-terrorists they captured of committing abuses during the military counter-revolution in 1964. The homicide rate has grown 124% in the last 3 decades. Brazilian prisons are a true disgrace. and the annual homicide rate is among the 3 highest in the world. In 2012, we had 56,337 homicides per year, 12 times bigger than all the 14 years of war in Iraq. The drug traffic increased since the Brazilian Socialist government removed our border troops. This led to the neighboring cocaine harvesting countries to increase their production, pass freely through the unguarded borders, and use the Brazilian ports as their preferred route to Europe and the US. This problem is a true tragedy for the people, but Dilma ridiculously mentioned recently that the drug consumption increase is a good sign as it reflects higher acquisition power. Really. The corruption today is completely uncontrolled, and we have noted corruption signs at many federal government levels and departments in numbers that were never recorded before in Brazil. There are literally hundreds of corruption scandals with absurdly high values, like the state-controlled Petrobras scandal, with stated capital losses above $88 billion by 2014. The BNDES, the National Development Bank, estimated as around $500 billion, and hundreds more. A few countries are even suing Petrobras for billions of dollars. Of course, the Brazilian taxpayers and honest people are fed up with all of this and are claiming their constitutional rights with the armed forces, which have been controlled not to act without public support during all this period. They have the integrity and the competence to execute this enormous task of saving the country from the Fórum São Paulo communist plans, removing the communist and corrupt people from the government, and from the complete social and economic chaos that we are living today. We now ask for your understanding and support to our armed forces during this very challenging endeavor. May God bless you all, and may God bless Brazil.